All right, so today we're going to be diving into a world where trade wars and global instability are the norm, but where blockchain and decentralization might just be those secret weapons for not only surviving, but thriving. We're going deep on this piece called Decentralization, blockchain solutions to trade wars and global instability. And trust me, it gets really interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating how this source really paints a picture of our current reality, right? We're talking rising trade wars, fractured alliances, and this international cooperation that seems to be hanging by a thread.
Yeah, it's not exactly a pretty picture, is it?
Yeah.
And the piece definitely doesn't sugarcoat those negative impacts either, right?
Yeah.
Economic uncertainty, supply chains that are completely in chaos, and rising costs hitting everyone's wallets.
Yeah, and it's serious when Warren Buffett is out there comparing tariffs to an act of war, which the source actually quotes.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful statement. And it makes you think, what happens when economic policies become weapons? The source specifically highlights these tensions between the U.S. and its usual allies,
Yeah.
right? Canada, Mexico, the European Union. We're not talking about like minor disagreements here.
Yeah.
These are major tariffs that really have the potential to reshape these relationships.
No, absolutely.
It makes you think about the bigger picture too, right? Is this the beginning of the end for globalization as we know it? The source actually brings up some concerns from economists about the impact on the world economy,
Yeah.
especially for smaller countries that rely really heavily on exports.
Yeah.
It's a bit daunting, to be honest.
It is. Here's where that light at the end of the tunnel starts to appear, I think. The source introduces this concept of decentralization as a potential solution, and pretty mind-blowing. We're talking about blockchain and these decentralized networks as ways to actually bypass traditional gatekeepers like governments and financial institutions, those big guys, and empower individuals and communities to connect and transact directly.
Okay, so for anyone who maybe needs a super quick refresher, how exactly does blockchain do that? It all sounds a little bit futuristic.
Sure. Think of it like this. Imagine this digital ledger that's duplicated and distributed across a network of computers. So instead of a single authority controlling everything, everyone on the network has a copy of the ledger, and every transaction is verified and added to the ledger through this process called a consensus mechanism. And because it's spread across so many computers, it's incredibly difficult to tamper with or shut down.
So no more relying on a single bank or government to control the flow of money or information.
Exactly. And that's really what makes blockchain trustless, permissionless, and resilient. These are those three key characteristics that the source really emphasizes.
And that's where things, I think, get really interesting, because this isn't just theoretical, right? We're seeing real-world examples already of how decentralized finance, or DeFi, is being used to navigate things like sanctions and trade barriers.
Absolutely. And one platform that's doing some really groundbreaking work in this space is IXO. They're building what they call an Internet of Impacts, which is essentially a decentralized network where people and organizations can connect and exchange value directly.
Yeah, I was reading about that, and I was really struck by IXO's proof of impact protocol. Can you explain how that works and why it's so important?
Absolutely. So imagine you want to support a project that's making a positive impact in the world, but you want to make sure your contribution is actually being used effectively. IXO's proof of impact protocol uses blockchain technology to track and verify the progress of projects, ensuring transparency and accountability.
So it's not just about throwing money at a problem and hoping for the best. You can actually see where your contribution is going and how it's making a difference.
Exactly. And that's a game changer when it comes to building trust and driving positive change. It really embodies this idea of using blockchain to create a more transparent and accountable system, bypassing those traditional intermediaries that often lack transparency.
Okay, so we've got trade wars, economic uncertainty, and then suddenly this technology appears that could potentially rewrite the rules of the game. It's almost like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does feel a bit like that, doesn't it? But the source argues that this is more than just a technological shift. It's a fundamental rethinking of how we organize ourselves and interact on a global scale. And that brings us to another fascinating concept the source explores: network states.
Network space. This is where we enter like the truly futuristic part of the conversation, right? Tell me more.
Think of them as digital-first communities with their own economies and governance structures. The key is that these network states operate outside the constraints of traditional nation-states, creating this framework for global cooperation that transcends geographical boundaries.
So digital nations existing entirely online, do they have their own laws, their own currencies?
That's the idea. Yeah, some are focused on like specific industries like tech or the arts. Others are centered around shared values like sustainability or social justice. And this source even suggests that these network states could pick up the slack where traditional trade relationships break down, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, that is a wild concept. So if two countries are at odds with each other, their citizens could potentially still connect and collaborate within these network states,
Hmm.
bypassing any real-world political barriers.
Exactly. It's like creating this digital safety net for international cooperation in a world that's becoming increasingly fragmented.
Okay, so we've got blockchain, we've got decentralized finance, now we've got network states.
Yeah.
My mind is officially blown. How does all of this actually work in practice? Can you give me
Yeah.
some concrete examples of how these network states are taking shape?
Absolutely. And that's where things get really exciting. We're starting to see some really interesting models emerge. Like some are using blockchain to create their own currencies, governance systems, even legal frameworks. Oh, wild. They're building a new world from the ground up, powered by technology and shared values.
So we're talking about building entire digital nations complete with their own economies and governance systems. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. And the source highlights how some are already using blockchain to create their own currencies,
Right.
governance systems, and even legal frameworks. Like I said, they're literally building a new world from the ground up, powered by technology and shared values.
Okay, so that's the big futuristic picture. But the source also dives into some really practical ways that individuals and businesses can leverage blockchain and decentralization right now. What are some of the key takeaways there?
One of the most immediate applications is in trade payments. The source suggests that companies engaged in international trade could start using cryptocurrencies and DeFi platforms to sidestep potential roadblocks in traditional finance.
So instead of relying on banks that might be subject to sanctions or delays, you could use cryptocurrencies to send payments across borders instantly and securely.
Exactly. And with significantly lower fees than traditional methods. Think about it. You could be a small business owner in one country selling your products to customers in another, and you wouldn't have to worry about currency conversions, international wire transfer fees, or the risk of payments being blocked.
That's huge for small businesses trying to compete in a global market. The source also mentions using blockchain to build more resilient supply chains. How does that work?
This is where blockchain's ability to track and verify provenance really shines. Imagine every step of a product's journey, from the raw materials to the finished good being recorded on an immutable ledger. Businesses could track their products in real time, ensuring transparency and accountability every step of the way.
So if a particular trade route gets disrupted due to, let's say, a natural disaster or political instability, you could use blockchain to quickly reroute your goods and minimize disruptions.
Exactly. You could identify alternative suppliers, track the movement of your goods, and ensure that they reach their destinations safely and efficiently. The source even suggests using smart contracts to automate things like tariff payments and insurance payouts, which could significantly reduce the administrative burden and uncertainty that often plagues international trade.
It's like having a digital safety net for your supply chain. It sounds like blockchain could be a game changer, especially in a world where disruptions are becoming increasingly common. But it's not just about individual companies adapting. The source also talks about collaborative solutions.
Absolutely. One interesting concept they highlight is the idea of industry consortia coming together to form decentralized trade networks, or DAOs. These are essentially self-governing communities of businesses that agree to trade with each other under a set of rules encoded on the blockchain.
So instead of relying on traditional trade agreements that can be slow and cumbersome, businesses could create their own digital trade zones governed by smart contracts and powered by blockchain.
Exactly. And because these networks are decentralized, they're less susceptible to political interference or manipulation. The source suggests that over time, these networks could evolve into larger network states of commerce, attracting members who seek stable and predictable trading relationships.
It's a fascinating concept, a future where businesses can choose to operate within these decentralized economic zones, forging their own paths, independent of the constraints of traditional nation states. But it's not just about businesses, is it? The source also talks about empowering communities.
Platforms like the one we discussed earlier, IXO, exemplify this idea of empowering communities with direct access. They allow people and organizations to connect and collaborate directly, bypassing those traditional gatekeepers and intermediaries.
So we're talking about things like crowdfunding, peer-to-peer lending, and even creating decentralized marketplaces where people can buy and sell goods and services directly.
Exactly. The source gives the example of communities and developing nations accessing funding and resources directly from individuals and organizations around the world. It's about cutting out the middleman. and creating a more equitable and efficient system for distributing resources and opportunities.
It sounds like these platforms could be a game changer for communities that have been historically marginalized or excluded from traditional economic systems. The source even suggests that these platforms could be used to create a kind of digital safety net, allowing people to connect and trade even if their countries are in conflict.
That's right. They use the example of two countries that have halted. Official trade individuals could still connect and trade directly using blockchain-based platforms, bypassing any political barriers that might be in place. It's a powerful reminder that technology can empower us to forge our own paths, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges.
It's inspiring to think about how blockchain and decentralization could help us build a more resilient and interconnected world, even in the midst of all the uncertainty and disruption we're facing. But the source doesn't just stop at describing these possibilities. It also talks about what individuals can do to participate in this emerging world.
That's right. One suggestion they make is exploring network state membership and governance.
So you could actually join one of these digital nations and help shape its development. How does that work in practice?
Some network states are still in the early stages of development, but others are already attracting members and experimenting with different governance models. It could involve contributing your skills and expertise to the community, participating in decision-making processes, or even investing in the network's development.
It sounds like a pretty radical departure from traditional models of citizenship and governance.
It is the source acknowledges the challenges and uncertainties that lie ahead, but it also emphasizes the importance of embracing these new possibilities and actively shaping the future we want to see.
So it's not just about waiting for these network states to fully materialize. Individuals can actually play a role in building them.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important point. The source raises the need to invest in education and infrastructure for Web3 adoption.
Web3, that's another term that gets thrown around a lot these days. Can you explain what that means and why it's so important in this context?
Think of Web3 as the next evolution of the internet built on blockchain technology and principles of decentralization. It's about creating a more open, transparent, and user-centric internet where individuals have more control over their data and their online experiences.
So instead of relying on a handful of giant tech companies to control everything, we're moving towards a more decentralized internet where power is distributed among users.
Exactly. And that's why education and infrastructure are so crucial. The source argues that we need to equip people with the knowledge and skills they need to understand and utilize these new technologies effectively. We need to build the infrastructure from internet access to blockchain development platforms to support the growth of this new digital ecosystem.
It sounds like we're talking about a massive shift, not just in technology, but also in how we think about the internet, about governance, about the role of individuals in shaping the future.
It is a massive shift, and it's not going to happen overnight. But the source makes a compelling case that this is a future worth striving for, a future where technology empowers individuals, fosters collaboration, and helps us build a more resilient and equitable world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here: blockchain, decentralization, network states, Web3. It's a lot to take in. What are some of the key takeaways for our listeners? What can they actually do to start preparing for this future?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important things is to start educating yourself about these technologies and how they work. There are tons of resources available online, from articles and videos to podcasts and online courses.
So don't be afraid to dive in and start exploring what else.
The source also encourages people to start experimenting with these technologies in their own lives. Maybe it's trying out a DeFi platform, exploring different cryptocurrencies, or even looking into joining a DAO or network state that aligns with your values.
It's about taking those first steps, even if they seem small, to familiarize yourself with this new world and start building the skills and knowledge you'll need to thrive in it. It's not just about technology. It's about a mindset shift.
Absolutely. It's about embracing new possibilities, being open to experimentation, and recognizing that you have the power to shape the future.
And to leave our listener with one final thought, the source paints this picture of a future where you're not just a passive consumer, but an active participant in a global decentralized economy. You're shaping the future of trade and cooperation.
It's a powerful vision, and it's one that's within reach. It's a future where we're all empowered to connect, collaborate, and build a world that's truly interconnected and equitable.
It does feel like we're on the cusp of a massive shift in how the world works. And I have to admit, it's both exciting and a little bit intimidating at the same time.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to process, but I think that's the beauty of it. We're not just talking about incremental changes here. This is a fundamental rethinking of how we organize ourselves, how we interact with each other, and how we actually build a future that's more resilient and equitable.
Yeah, and it all circles back to that idea we talked about at the beginning, right? A world where trade wars and geopolitical conflicts can't actually stop people from connecting and doing business globally. It sounds almost utopian. The source argues that it's not as far-fetched as it might seem.
Exactly. Blockchain and decentralization are really giving us the tools to build that world block by block, transaction by transaction. It's about empowering individuals and communities, fostering collaboration, and creating these systems that are more transparent, accountable, and resilient in the face of all this global uncertainty.
So what does all of this mean for our listener? What can they actually do to prepare for this future and maybe even play a role in shaping it?
I think the source really encourages exploration. Could be as simple as researching platforms like IXO and seeing how they're using blockchain to create real-world impact. Or maybe it's dipping your toes into the world of decentralized finance or exploring the concept of network states.
Yeah, it's about taking those first steps to familiarize yourself with this new world and start building the skills and knowledge you'll need to navigate it. It's not just about technology, it's about a mindset shift, right?
Absolutely. It's about embracing new possibilities, being open to experimentation, and recognizing that you have the power to shape the future.
And to leave our listener with one final thought. The source paints this picture of a future where you're not just a passive consumer, but an active participant in a global decentralized economy. You're shaping the future of trade and cooperation.
It's a powerful vision, and it's one that's within reach. It's a future where we're all empowered to connect, collaborate, and build a world that's truly interconnected and equitable.
It's a future worth striving for, and we hope this deep dive has given you the tools and inspiration to start building it.